OSCE and their activity in Ukraine. Michael Bociurkiw, their spokesperson. Good afternoon, dear colleagues.
We've just come back from Donetsk, so hence the somewhat ruffled appearance, but I'll try to do my best to keep my highest standards of articulateness. Anyway, so as I said, just literally now, we've a team led by Deputy Chief Monitor Alexander Hug has come back from Donetsk, of course, via Dnipropetrovsk just in the past couple of hours. And this short visit provided the Deputy Chief Monitor and a small team from Kyiv, as well, of course, our very large monitoring team in Donetsk, the opportunity to meet with our growing Donetsk-based team to discuss the general security situation with them. And I can tell you that was an extremely useful exercise, considering that in the east of Ukraine, in one given day, we're doing 30 to 40 patrols in one day, so covering a lot of ground there. Also, we were looking at the state of the ceasefire and, of course, follow-up steps from the Minsk packages, such as what we've been talking about in the past weeks, the withdrawal of heavy weaponry. And as probably most of you saw, we were able to visit Donetsk Airport. This is the first time for all of us or most of us, to go right inside of the front parking garage, and then also right into the terminal building up to the second and third floors. And I can tell you that many of us have worked in many conflict zones before and have seen massive destruction. And I can tell you some of us were shocked at what we saw, just the level, the extent of the destruction on the one hand, but also the amount of unexploded ordnance, from small little bullets to, we saw grenade launchers, we saw bigger shells that had not been exploded. So we got a very good appreciation of the complexity of when the time comes to clean up this site. It's going to be very difficult. I can also tell you that in the front of the terminal building, we saw at least one body there lying in the field, exposed to the elements. And again, because of the widespread number of unexploded ordnance, it's very difficult to do those types of retrievals. But of course, that has to happen. And just as an aside, you know, you're in this terribly ruined building that has been pounded and pounded for months and months. And the only sign of life was, believe it or not, a small cat that was walking through the terminal building. It was a bright sign of life in a kind of environment of despair. I can also report to you that during our entire time at the airport and in the surrounding fields, there is a complete silence. Not even a pistol shot was fired. So we recognize that both sides held their fire, and that was good. After the visit to the airport, we went to the nearby village of Spartak, and again, I can tell you this is an area that has been heavily shelled over the past months. Very little sign of life whatsoever, no power, no gas, no running water. There are we saw elderly people there, not too many, going back into their homes, but also in Spartak, a huge problem, as in many villages throughout eastern Ukraine that have been exposed to shelling, is the existence of unexploded ordnance. And indeed, one of the houses we went to, which an elderly man came out, and he showed us an unexploded missile right in his front yard. So it gives you a sense of the danger to people. Now, I know that there was a story circulating yesterday that we had come under fire while in Spartak. This is not the case whatsoever. There was some light arms fire, but other than that, we felt completely safe, and we were able to make quite an extensive observation in that particular village, observing the damage, talking to villagers. But again, the small arms fire is sort of a reminder that the ceasefire does remain somewhat fragile, as is the case in Shirokane, where, of course, there's been much heavier shelling. The temporary ceasefire that was last week did not hold for very long, and the Chief Monitor, Ambassador Apakan, did say in his own words his profound disappointment that the ceasefire there does not hold and that innocent civilians continue to be exposed to shelling. As long as guns continue to be fired, and as long as substantial amounts of heavy weaponry continue to be concentrated in defensive and offensive positions, achieving a comprehensive and sustainable ceasefire will be difficult. Now, I also have to say, just if I can, going back to Donetsk Airport, remember that this is more than an airport terminal building. This was one of the symbols, one of the key infrastructure projects of the 2012 European Football Championships, as well as the big stadium in Donetsk. And it was, that and the other buildings were intended not only to modernize Ukraine's infrastructure, but also to unify it through sport. Unfortunately, now at the moment, we still see too much division, we see too much distrust, and of course, too much death and displacement. Now, when we spoke to the shell-shocked villagers in the town of Spartak yesterday, they told us something that we hear from countless people, not only in and around the conflict zone, but in cities like Dnipropetrovsk. I'm talking about internally displaced people, IDPs. We meet with IDPs here in Kyiv regularly. We have a large team here. We've met with IDPs as far away as Lviv. And the one thing that they tell us is that they're waiting for calm to come to their areas, and also they're going to wait for that calm, sustainable ceasefire in order to be able to return home and return to their normal lives. Now, of course, as you know by now, the mission well, most of you, I think, facilitation of dialogue is one of the key cornerstones of the mandate of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine. It is for this reason that the Deputy Chief Monitor met with the leadership of the so-called DNR, as well as just yesterday, late afternoon, the Ukrainian and Russian generals of the Joint Center for Control and Cooperation, the so-called JCCC. During those meetings, he raised a number of points, including the absolute need for unrestricted and secure access for Special Monitoring Mission monitors, for strict adherence to the key provisions of the Minsk packages, particularly baseline data on removal of heavy weaponry, and also implementable and practical steps for providing humanitarian aid to civilians impacted by the crisis. Now, I'll keep this short, but I would like to underline the humanitarian crisis. I've mentioned this before to you, that is unfolding before our very eyes in eastern Ukraine. Our monitors have visited and reported on the deteriorating situation in many parts of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblasts. And as we saw again in villages like Spartak, or previously in Shirokane, many villages lack running water and power. Many hospitals and clinics are heavily damaged and lack essential drugs, supplies, and equipment. And untold numbers of children are shell-shocked, have absolutely nowhere to play or learn. And access to pensions and other forms of social support is severely restricted for many. We see with our own eyes when we visit these villages, not only in the conflict zone but on the conflict line, that many people are at their wits' end in terms of not only being exposed to heavy shelling, but also the lack of essential facilities, utilities, and supplies. And indeed, as we have done in Shirokane and elsewhere, in Donetsk, I spoke about the last time I was here, we have facilitated access for partners like the International Committee of the Red Cross to come in with essential humanitarian aid. I'd like just to close by reiterating Ambassador Apakan, our Chief Monitor's call for all sides to silence their weapons, for the immediate removal of heavy weaponry to agreed upon lines, and for a continuation of dialogue so that creative and sustainable solutions can be implemented to secure a long-lasting peace. One very quick administrative note, if I can. Just recently, the Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine came out with another thematic report. This one is talking about the serious humanitarian situation in East Ukraine. And what the report underlined, and by the way, it is available for download on our website, is that it underlines the continuing deteriorating conditions in hospitals, in orphanages, in homes for the elderly in eastern Ukraine, and that this situation is having a severe impact on the most vulnerable groups of the population in Luhansk and Donetsk. The report itself examines the negative effects of fighting and withdrawal of state financing on health and residential care institutions, their patients and employees, as well as on internally displaced persons now living in collective centers in Donbas. It notes, again, the lack of medicine, that it also significantly affects the functioning of psychiatric hospitals, which are confronted with an increase of post-traumatic stress cases related to the ongoing crisis. And I should tell you that the report itself, it's one of several thematic reports the Special Monitoring Mission has issued, is based on the findings of monitors who visit more than 50 health and residential care facilities in eastern Ukraine from mid-December to the end of January 2015. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Дуже дякую, Michael. Колеги. Прошу представлятися.
Please introduce yourselves. And
Go with the Wall Street Journal. Thank you for all your hard work. Two questions. First of all, are you guys getting any fresh satellite imagery from any of the sites? And the second one, so there was a trilateral group meeting recently this week, and after this meeting, some media reports surfaced saying that the sides may agree on the withdrawal of larger amount of different types of heavy weaponry. So I wonder if you heard or know something about that, and maybe you could just give us an idea of what's going on right now in terms of heavy weaponry. I guess you still see a lot of tanks and a lot of other heavy weapons still that hasn't yet been withdrawn. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. Yeah, indeed. I mean, during this trip, we did see some static tanks, not tanks on the move, but static ones. And I know there was some discussion among the sides whether tanks are included in the Minsk packages. I do know that this came up in discussions yesterday with the JCCC generals, and I can't, comment directly on what was discussed there, but I can tell you that, of course, the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine does welcome any further, of course, disengagement or de-escalation. By the way, there are also reports circulating that one of the sides have also agreed to remove lighter weaponry. So if that's the case, of course, that would be welcomed. And of course, the OSCE stands ready to monitor the withdrawal of those weapons. In terms of the high technology that we use, we can't go into too much detail, but I can tell you that the call did go out to the 57 participating states for assistance in high technology after the second Minsk package, and that part of that is coming in, satellite imagery, and this is a very, very good positive complement to the images that we're now getting from our two functional unarmed aerial vehicles, so-called drones, which, by the way, are now once again stationed near Mariupol.
So you're getting satellite imagery, right?
We are, and we continue to look for more ways of expanding or enhancing, rather, our monitoring capabilities through high technology.
Дякую, будь ласка, наступне запитання. Інтернет-видання Insider.
Insider Internet publication, you told us a lot about the Donetsk Airport and about difficulties that there are with evacuating the bodies. Do you have any information about how many bodies are there on the territory of the airport? And can you tell us which side the body that you saw belonged to? Thank you. This is a very good question.
We did tweet some images from inside the airport terminal building, and you can see the massive destruction that we ourselves saw, and you probably can also see some of the unexploded ordnance there. The escort that we had indicated that there probably are more bodies there, but you have an immense amount of rubble, and in that you have mixed in unexploded ordnance. There could be booby traps. In fact, there were some discussions while we were in Donetsk about what is going to happen to that site. You can't even call it a terminal or an airport building any longer. It would take very, very specialists to work on that site, and very special equipment, again, because of all the shells and from small bullets up to quite big shells are mixed into that debris. And aside from that, there's lots of, you can smell it, the flammable materials, oil, things like that. The structure itself, I'm not an expert, but it doesn't look very stable. Parts of it could collapse. I noticed that when we walked through the garage in the front of the terminal building, there were some automobiles there that had burned, and you can imagine the hot temperatures that went up into the ceiling. It's a very incredibly strong building, but even at high temperatures like that, it tends to weaken the structure.
Дякую. Уточнення?
Да, уточнення. То ви можете приблизно оцінити кількість?
So can you tell us approximately how many bodies are still there?
I mean, this is, I think, up to the sides to determine. What I can tell you is that the special monitoring mission, as we have already, it stands ready to facilitate the removal of bodies from that and other sites. Usually we've been doing this, as we did in Shirokine, with the assistance, the very close assistance of the International Committee of the Red Cross. But I don't want to be committing to any numbers. It's very difficult to tell. I wish I had some images with me, but to give you a sense, to go far inside the building to where we went, there's just a small path that has been created, and you can see on left and right hand side these unexploded munitions. So it's a very difficult area to navigate. If I can also add, not only in the Donetsk immediate vicinity of Donetsk Airport, but in the nearby village that we went to, we also saw little bomblets. These are small little bombs about this size, and of course, this is an enormous threat, especially to children who tend to, as we've seen in other conflicts, tend to pick these things up, and it can cause very, very bad injuries or death to them. In fact, I referenced the statement by the UNICEF regional director recently. She was here in Ukraine, and she did reference the big threat of unexploded ordnance in eastern Ukraine. So this is something, of course, that has to figure in to when the time comes, hopefully it will be soon, when internally displaced people come back with their families to places around Donetsk Airport or to places that have been heavily shelled, like Shirokine. What's the situation going to be like for children? As our thematic report indicates, there have been, for example, schools and hospitals that have been hit not only once, but 2 or 3 times. And children don't have places to learn. In many areas, they don't have places to play. And we also must remember the psychosocial needs that they're going to have.
Дякую. Наступне запитання, будь ласка.
The next question, please.
Can you tell us a bit more about the restrictions that the monitors face because of the distrust on both sides? I know, like the Ukrainian side, there's a conspiracy theory that the OSCE has been infiltrated by Russians, and can you comment on that, how that affects their work?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Well, on your second part of your question, we are very open and transparent about the number of monitors, which, by the way, is around 450, 460 right now, 350 in the eastern part of Ukraine. And of that number, I believe the amount of colleagues from the monitors from the Russian Federation is about 25 or so out of 450. I won't go into the steps everyone goes through, including myself, to be absorbed into the mission. I think you know that by now. But they are members of our team, as are members from other countries as well. So in terms of the access, we have good days and we have bad days. But there are delays ranging from just a few minutes where colleagues' documents are looked at to several hours to no access whatsoever. We constantly, as I did just now, remind all sides that we do require unrestricted and safe access to all parts. We should be able to go any place at any time. And one of the we received an extensive briefing in Donetsk from our colleagues there. One of the areas that are almost no-go are parts of the far eastern part of Donetsk Oblast and the southern part of Luhansk Oblast, where Cossack groups are in control of the area. Just a final note there, you'll probably think I'm a broken record, but many, many months ago, I described parts of the conflict areas like a patchwork quilt. And it is the case because you have these two bigger groups, but then you have these smaller groups as well, who are almost entities unto their own. So, but we're hopeful that our access will improve, especially when it comes to the monitoring of removal of heavy weaponry.
Thank you.
Наступне запитання, будь ласка.
Next question. Ukraine Forum, could you tell us, yesterday Mr. Cook, when he was speaking about the situation in the Donetsk Airport, he said that Donetsk Airport became a symbol of separation between the regions of Ukraine. Do you think this is a correct expression?
And I'm glad to clarify that. What the Deputy Chief Monitor said was that, again, what I just said, very similar, is that the Donetsk Airport, as well as the other, huge infrastructure projects erected for the 2012 European Football Championships, like the big stadium in Donetsk City, which we also drove by the way, these were, again, intended to, at that time, unify the country through sport. Time and time again, through time, we've seen how sport can unify countries, regions, the world, the World Cup, for example, that took place in South Africa. So I think that was what was meant, and that he did say also that, as I said, that right now it's unfortunate because there is too much division, too much distrust, and too much death and displacement. But we don't have to get into the close ties that are between peoples here in Ukraine, family ties, commercial ties. If I can just go off on a very quick tangent, the other thing we saw, because of course the commerce is the lifeblood of many areas, and there were long lineups of vehicles, commercial vehicles coming in to the Donetsk region and also going out as well, but more so coming in, and I would say almost 2 or 3 kilometers long. And the drivers, the trucks, lorries seem to spend a lot of time just waiting to clear the checkpoint. So as hopefully we move further and further towards normalization, of course, the free flow of commerce is going to be a very important aspect. One other note that we observed with our own eyes is the road leading between Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk. Parts of it are in very, very bad shape. There could be many reasons for this, but as many of you know, a lot of the rail lines are not operating, so presumably a lot of that has shifted to the roads, but very, very bad shape, and that's going to take quite a bit of effort to upgrade those key roads.
Associated Press. Do you feel that the OSCE monitoring mission to Ukraine may monitor, observe the border with Russia shortly?
Well, thank you for the question. We are already undertaking some border monitoring. Ambassador Alpakan has said many times that the mission is committed to undertaking border monitoring. But you have to remember as well that the length of the border under the control of the irregularly armed groups, as we call them, is about 470 kilometers long. I just was able to look at our patrol map over the past week, and there were quite a number of patrols that did go up to the border, and you'll recall that my colleague, Deputy Chief Monitor Alexander Hug, with his team, when they visited Mariupol and Shirokine, I believe it was the first day of their visit, they did go all the way up to the border with the Russian Federation.
So the question is about numbers of monitors, or this is about access to the border?
It's actually both. It's the capacity, our own capacity, as well as the access. We do expect, after Minsk and after talks of the Trilateral Contact Group and other forums, unrestricted access to be able to monitor the border. And we do realize, again, given the length of the border, that this could be an area where high technology could come into play. But I can tell you we're looking at a whole range of options in terms of technology to enhance our monitoring.
Дуже дякую. У нас є час буквально ще для одного.
Thank you very much. We still have time for just one question. Irina Shevchenko, so could you be more precise whether I was right in understanding you that when you were in Donetsk region, you saw commercial trailers coming from the Ukrainian controlled part to the temporarily to the territories controlled by the militants and vice versa?
Well, going towards Donetsk City, we saw a long lineup of commercial vehicles going in an eastwardly direction. And again, these are commercial vehicles. And then, some long lineups going out as well. But, I recall seeing that many months ago, for example, in August, around the time of MH17. It happens because there are checkpoints along the way. And as I said, the roads are not in the best shape. They're quite narrow. So when you line up so many commercial vehicles, it can be quite a long lineup and quite a long wait. We're also aware that, and this is nothing new, it's in our daily reports, that in many parts of the East, there is a lack of essential goods, for example, drugs, food products, things like that. So again, one does hope for a quick normalization so that that commercial lifeblood can return, and so that ordinary civilians can, purchase the goods that they need.
Thank you very much, Michael. Дуже дякую, Майкл. Сподіваємося почути вас наступного.
We hope to listen to you next week, and our next briefing is about the Museum Council insisting that Ministry of Culture of Ukraine